In this lecture, I want to talk about the psychology of being born. In doing so, I'll be relying on the book Birth Without Violence by Fred Leboyer, as well as a follow-up paper written by Fred Wertz in the Journal of Phenomenological Psychology. I think. I'll have to double-check that. If we can look at the psychology of being born, then we'll be able to accomplish something very neat as humanistic psychologists. That is, we'll be able to understand the perspective of experience as it's being lived. If we can do it with infants, we should be able to do it with anybody. Since if anyone's been dehumanized, it's infants. The assumption has long been that the birth experience from the infant's perspective is just one of physiological mechanisms, that there's no real meaning of the experience. It's just crying signifies breathing and health and well-being, and that's it. Who cares about the rest? So let's take a look at a picture here. This is a picture of a post-delivery room. The doctor here is holding onto an infant by its ankles. I say it because it doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. It's just a thing. It's a bundle of mechanisms at this point, at least from the modern scientific perspective. Dad's happy, mom's happy, the doctor's happy. Well, take a look at this infant. How's the infant doing? If we zoom in on the face of this infant, we get a different picture, a different story. What if the expression that actually looks familiar, in fact, if you really empathize with this infant, it's going to hurt. You're going to be uncomfortable. You don't want to see somebody in this kind of agony and anguish. What if that is actually expressive? What if there's an experience going on here? What can we learn about it? Well, take a look at the infant's eyes, ears, arms, skin. What's going on? How would you feel if you were pulled out of a nice 98.6 degree womb, comfortable with all your nutritional needs supplied, and then thrown into an examining room or an operating room with bright spotlights, loud noises? It's probably 55 degrees to prevent any bacterial growth or spread of viruses. What if that was your transition? Imagine being pulled out of your bed on a winter morning and thrown out into a snowbank and breathing for the first time. Put all those things together, it's not going to be very comfortable. Consider this as a transition from one stage to another. In life, developmental psychologists tell us, we're always transitioning from one thing to another, or one stage to another. And these transitions, as Erik Erikson calls them, are crises. And so each crisis is faced by being pulled from between two poles, or you're being pulled in this tension. On one side, there's comfort, familiarity, support, predictability, and so on. On the other side, all of those things are upset, but there's the possibility of growth. So there's the desire to stay where you are and the desire to expand beyond your normal boundaries and grow. And both of these are great, and crises are experienced when you're in between and being pulled both directions. So let's look at the birth process that way. You're being pulled between womb and world. The womb is comfortable, it's safe, your needs are met, and then the world has, well, a world of opportunities. Now, how can we make that transition an easier one? How can we respect where the child is coming from and where the child is going and make that an easier transition? D.W. Winnicott suggests that transitional objects can help this transition occur. A transitional object is something we take from the previous stage with us onto an advanced stage so that we can rely on it, to have some familiarity, and it helps us with that transition. So how might we mediate the environment for the child? So it's going from 98.6 degrees into like a 55 degree operating room. How might we change that? Well, wait a minute. Wouldn't it be unsafe to have a warm operating room because then bacteria could just grow and be cultivated in there? Well, sure, that's a valid concern, and that's usually the one that students like to pick on. But can you think of a safer place in a hospital can you think of a safer place to put a room that's a comfortable temperature than a contemporary hospital where next door there's a bacteria-free stainless steel operating table or whatever? Keep a room comfortably at a comfortable temperature, and if there's a problem, shift them through the one door into this safer room. And of course, if you go into a wing in a hospital today, there'll be comfortable rooms or comfortable areas where mother and child can be, but that doesn't preclude the possibility that there is a safe room nearby where any sort of operation can take place. And bacteria can be killed and controlled and so on. How about the bright lights? Well, a doctor needs to see what he or she is doing, so we need to have the super bright lights, right? Well, what if we turn the lights off to respect the brightness for the child? What if it was dimly lit in there? But, well, wait a minute. We want this to be as problem-free as possible, so the doctor needs to be able to see what she's doing. Well, maybe she can try a little bit more dimly lit room. And if there's a problem, then turn the lights on. We don't need to assume or take every precaution if the person that's being violated, the trauma experienced exclusively by one person, we're not really looking out for that one person, and that, of course, is the infant. So we've got temperature we can control, we've got lights we can control, we can ask the doctors and nurses to talk more quietly, not be banging stuff around. And of course, if we take these things into consideration, we see a much different experience of the birthing process. Instead of it being characterized by discomfort, we can actually see comfort. An infant doesn't have to cry at birth. We don't need to cut the umbilical cord right away. We don't have to pull the infant right out of the mother's arms. It can be more of a comfortable process for both mother and child. And so after Leboyer took a more careful look and controlled some of these factors, he learned that infants can actually have a pleasant birth experience. Crying doesn't have to be part of it. A child can yawn as its first breath. It can be comfortable. They can expose themselves to light, not having to clench their eyes shut because of the pain of the brightness. They can actually slowly acclimate to it and become more and more familiar to these new sensations. And today, water births are somewhat common, or at least we're familiar with what a water birth is. And at the time this book was written, there was no such thing. Shortly after this was written, we had what were called Leboyer births, which is birth into water. And so now we call them water births. He has, of course, revolutionized the way that the birthing process can be. And for the most part, we take into greater consideration the experience of the mother and the child as a result of something like this. Unfortunately, this study wasn't done by a psychologist. You'd think if anybody, it'd be a developmental psychologist, but it's not been customary in the history of psychology to consider something like the experience of the infant. Hopefully, we can learn from this the same way that Fred Wertz did when he wrote this paper, sort of drawing our attention as psychologists, phenomenological psychologists and humanistic psychologists, to the phenomenon of the experience of being born, something, again, that we don't often attribute to infants. So if we can accomplish looking at the developmental transition from the vantage point of an infant, we should be able to do this with any developmental transition, toddlers, young children, adolescents, adults, and then even into late adulthood. And we accomplish this by not taking for granted that we know what's going on, but really trying to look through the eyes and the ears and the body of the person going through the experience. And so that is a humanistic way of doing developmental psychology.